Welcome to Engaging the Supernatural, where we explore what God is saying through signs, wonders, and miracles. This is part two of a conversation with my good friend Ivan Tuttle. Last time we spent our entire episode talking about the experience he had in hell. We left off right when he was before the gates of heaven, and that's where we're going to pick up our conversation today. Ivan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
So last time when we were talking, you're at the gates of heaven. You described what it looked like. You described the people you saw there. But you encounter an angel. That angel takes your hand. What happens next?
Well, the angel took me over the hand, said, I can't let go of his hand. I had to hold his hand. Well, I wasn't ready for heaven. I couldn't be in heaven because I haven't
Sure.
done the things I needed to
and
do.
the angel, and this is something that's very unique about your story. The angel told you weren't staying.
Correct. Because if I had to stay dead, I had to go back to hell because that's where that's where I belonged. So the angel took me around and started to show me things in heaven. Of course, the first thing you see is a bunch of people. And you see this beautiful city. You see this river, crystal clear. And I'm going through that. And then I see Jesus coming. And he started coming along, through these crowds of people. And the people were just like, we had mentioned before, it's almost like a Palm Sunday thing where the crowd was going crazy because here's the Son of God, God himself, his son, coming through there. And it was just a unrealistic type thing that we can't understand here on earth. How beautiful it is, how everybody is just so excited, here it is, here he is, and everybody's excited. Yeah, it was wonderful to see him. He didn't speak to me, but he looked at me and he smiled at me. And the angel talked to me about that later on. So, yeah.
And in terms of knowing it was Jesus, did you just know, or was it something like, how did you know it was Jesus?
Oh, you just know it's Jesus. I mean, come on. It's like I've seen you. If I saw you again, I'd know it's you. But, it's when you have that relationship with him. At one time in my life, I had that relationship with him. But when you're in heaven, you're in the glory of God. That's God's glory is all over heaven. There isn't a single space in there that doesn't have God's glory on it. You know everything. So when Jesus comes, just like I saw other people from the Bible too, I saw them. I knew exactly who they were. It wasn't something where you have to go, excuse me, what's your name?
Help me, Mr. Angel. Who is that?
Yes, because you just know it. It's because your spirit is so much more alive in you than our flesh is,
So you get through the gate, you see Jesus amongst a crowd of people. What happens next? What's the first thing the angel shows you?
Well, the first thing the angel showed me was buildings. So I got to see these buildings. Are you talking about after seeing Jesus or?
Well, either one.
Okay. So after seeing Jesus, the angel took me around. Then the angel said to me, turn and look. And when the angel said to turn and look, of course, the angel's got a hold of my right hand. I'm turning to my left. I don't know what you want me to see back there. Angel says, no, turn towards me. So as I turn towards the angel, he disappears. He's not there. I feel his hand. I've got his hand. Trust me, I'm not going to let go of that hand because I don't want to go back to hell. So I got a hold of his hand. And all of a sudden, I saw a timeline. I saw the earth as a timeline. I wish I could draw that out to show you, but I got to watch the beginning, how the earth was formed. And it's just a ball of water sitting out there in this darkness. And then God himself, the Spirit of God came down and moved all over it. I mean, he was just hovering all over the earth. He was preparing it for us. He's preparing it for man. He's preparing this place where he's going to make somebody that's going to be there forever. And he can come and communicate with them. He can come there and talk to them. He can do things with them. And this was a new thing that he was doing, and we're a part of that. We got that DNA. But the thing about it, when God was coming down there doing that, he was giving the earth his DNA.
In terms of your body, obviously you're in a spiritual body, but do you also kind of look like you do in human form? What does that look like in heaven?
I was handsome.
Well, and a lot of people will say, you look like your age that you did, like in your mid to late 20s or early 30s. I heard
that's where I didn't see anybody like Moses didn't have gray hair and a beard. It was gray. Nobody has gray hair up there. Nobody has, nobody's bald. I had hair. Of course I had hair anyway.
It gives me hope.
Gives me hope. But it's like everybody's younger, and you're just, your body is just completely different. And you recognize yourself. You see yourself.
Sure.
It's you, like when you see somebody, like if your grandparents died and all you ever saw them was when they were old, well, you'll see them when they're young, but you'll still know they're your grandparents. You'll just know it. It's
Sure.
it's a spirit thing that you just get to know that. So answering that question, yes, that's much.
Well, and one of the things that sticks out to me, we spent some time with John Burke yesterday, and he talked about when blind people have a near death experience and maybe they've never actually seen physically in the natural world, they can see things in heaven. Their bodies are restored in heaven. People who have different issues, deformities, whatever it might be on earth, it's different in heaven. And I think that's one thing that's unique about you. Your left hand
Oh yeah,
is
oh yeah,
deformed.
yes.
Tell us what that looked like in heaven.
Well, on earth, I only have four fingers on my left hand, and one's crooked and the thumb's short. But in heaven, my left hand was like my right hand, except for the thumb was where it belongs, on the left hand. And it was just the same. I mean,
Sure.
there was not anything different about from a left to right. So that much you could see, when I was in heaven.
Sure.
So that was a complete physical change.
And I mean, with that kind of thing, did you notice it and were you like, whoa, or are you just so overwhelmed with everything else? It was just kind of like, okay, it's there.
Exactly. You are so overwhelmed. There's so much in heaven that just overwhelms you. You just can't. So what? Okay, great. It didn't matter to me. It's just like, wow, this is cool. That was about it. I mean, that's the only reaction you're going to get from me from that. But it was kind of unique. I mean, I hadn't seen myself like that, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so yeah.
And in terms of like buildings and structures, are people just sitting on a cloud playing a harp in heaven, or do they have purpose and meaning, things that they're doing in heaven?
Oh, they're all playing golf. No.
Chad would be happy. Chad would be happy.
Actually, what happens in heaven is that, look, it's the things that you have on earth that you think are important aren't in heaven. Okay, so you're not thinking, it's not the same type of thing. There's only one thing you can take with you to heaven. You know what that is? Love. That's the only gift that you get on earth that you get to take with you in heaven. You get to take love with you. So love is the number one thing up there. And that's all you do. You're so enthroned by the things of heaven,
Right.
the praise, the worship that's there. I mean, you're in the presence of God. Okay. When you're in the presence of God, you're not thinking about anything that you want, because all your spirit wants anyways is to praise and worship him.
Right.
And people go, well, doesn't that get tiring? No, man, you can do that for all eternity, because it's just something about it. Because you don't get tired. You don't get out of breath, nothing. It's beautiful. It's great. So yeah, that was my number one thing. Just being able to praise God with all the other people.
And for me, again, and I keep saying this, one of the things that sticks out from your story, but also Jim Woodford's story, Randy Kay has some of this in his story as well. Seeing lost children in heaven. And these can be children who, maybe they were aborted, maybe they were stillborn, or they died as young children, whatever the case might be. But one of the unique things you saw moms and dads being reunited with their children in heaven. And for me, that's one of the most beautiful aspects of your story, that it brings healing and hope to so many families who have lost little children. Walk us through what you saw in heaven. What did that look like?
Well, when you see these little children, I'm just going to skip over some of this just to get right to it. When the mother or father, let's just talk about the mother for a minute. When the mother would come to heaven, now let's say the mother had aborted a child or two children or whatever the case may be, and she gets to have, during that time, sometime in her life, she asks God for forgiveness. God forgives her. She makes it to heaven. She gets to heaven. As soon as she gets up there, this child, now, however this mother or father perceives what this child's going to be like, what that child, what their mind, what they picture in their mind, what their child is going to be like, when they get to heaven, that's what their child's like. Their child is at that age.
Sure.
So when that reunion comes, the mother immediately recognizes that's her child or that's her children. She'll immediately recognize them. The children will know who the mother is, and they run to each other. I mean, if you want to call it run, they just move to each other so fast, and they grab and they hold each other, and it's such a joy. It's like, they can't squeeze them enough, hug them enough. It's just a beautiful, beautiful reunion. It's probably the most beautiful thing you ever see. It almost brings me to tears, and it's kind of hard.
Sure.
I'm trying not to. Okay. I did enough of that earlier. So it brings you to tears because it's so beautiful.
Right.
That love. I mean, if you can imagine this, you think that it's all lost. That, I got, it was a blob, and it's not a blob. It was a living being inside of you. And now you're there, and now you get to have this child, and you get to witness this and hold this child and do whatever. And the child, the nice thing about the child can communicate with you. So
Another thing from your story that I think is unique is you had some angel encounters and you had some level of understanding of what these different types of angels were. Tell us about some of the angels you saw in heaven.
Well, I want to start with the archangels because this is where I get the most comments about. I saw
Sure.
three,
Okay.
and everybody's saying no, there should only be two because Lucifer was one and he got kicked out of heaven, and we have the other two, but the Lord showed me three. So I guess evidently God replaced them. So the archangels, well, they're so powerful that when they do something, they change the whole course of the earth. When they do something, when they come and they're gonna do something on earth, they change the course of everything that's happening on earth. It's not going to be the same whenever they come, whenever they're present. Something major is going to happen. Then you have other angels. You have angels that are your guardian angels. You have angels that are helper angels. That are going around trying to help. Like you hear people get in a car wreck and somebody lifted the car off, but nobody's there. That's
Right.
a helper angel that goes and does that. There's angels that just take prayer back and forth, answers to prayer, and they come and deliver the prayer to you, like somebody wanting healing. And God says, I want the angel, just take that to them. And they drop the healing into them. That's not how most prayers are done. I can't explain it, but there's some things that are done that way, and there's angels that look like us, there's just so many types of different angels.
Is it the younger us?
Always the younger
Okay.
us. But evidently they can look like the older us too if they need to. But you're not there yet, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but they don't all have wings. Okay, I want to be real blunt.
Sure.
Very few of them have wings. So that was a thing that some people came up with, one thing, because they couldn't understand how anybody could fly without wings. So, but actually most of them don't have wings.
Well, let's fast forward. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about your ministry and things that have come after you return from heaven. But in terms of heading back to earth, heading back into your body, how did you know that you were being sent back? What did that moment look like?
Well, I was told by the angel. Okay. The angel said, okay, here's the gifts. I'm not going to go into all of them right now.
Sure.
Here's the gifts that God's given you. You're going to take these gifts back. And he just imparted them to me.
So God gave you a deposit of gifts to bring back with you.
Yes. And then I was told to keep my mouth shut. So, these are the instructions I was given. I was told not to talk about it. I could tell somebody that I died. I went to hell, heaven, I came back, but I can't give any details. I couldn't really talk about it until I was told the angel said, I will either be there in person or and tell you that you can speak about it, or God himself will speak to you about it. And so know that I was being sent back, and I had to go back. And believe it or not, as much as I didn't want to leave, I knew I had to leave or I have to spend the rest of life in hell. So
Sure.
the rest of my eternity in hell. So I was sent back, and that's how I knew I was being sent back, since you asked.
Well, and because we've talked about it at length in other interviews, I want to move past. So you're sent back, you freak out the paramedics, you spend the night processing in your chair in your living room, just trying to figure out what in the world happened. But then you go to the doctor, and I think this is a significant part of your story as well, because when you had your near-death experience and went to hell and went to heaven, people didn't talk about this stuff all that much. I mean, doctors were encountering this stuff, but that was in the time that Raymond Moody was just getting started writing his books and really giving us language to talk about near-death experiences. And you go to the doctor and you have a conversation. Talk to us about the conversation you had with him and how he helped you process what you experienced.
Well, I stayed awake that whole night crying till about 6:30 in the morning. I mean, just it's hard to explain.
Sure.
It was a really emotional time in my life. I had to get rid of everything in my life. So I go to the doctor's office. I had to talk to somebody. And I went down there, and this doctor had a little office, looked like a little closet, but he came in there and did his notes and everything in this little office. He had a little space down there, and I knew about this office. And I'd asked him, and they told me where it was at. And I went down there, and I sat on the floor leaning up against, his door. I'm waiting for him to show up because he's going to show up. He always comes in around 7:00 in the morning. That's what he had told me. And so I waited for him. When the doctor showed up, I said, hey, listen, I got to talk to you. This happened to me last night. I need to talk to somebody, and I need to talk to you about it. So he said, come on in. And I don't even know how he got behind his desk. There was a little space over there. He got behind his desk, and I'm sitting across from him. And I'm telling him, look, I died. And man, I went straight to hell. I can't really tell you. I'm not supposed to tell you all the things, but man, it was horrible in hell. And then I went to heaven, and I saw all these beautiful things in heaven. And I'm just trying to just tell him without telling him, I can't tell him everything, but I was so excitable and so desperate, you know, really, I'm like, can you validate this for me, And I can remember he sat back, the whole time. And then he leaned forward to me and he says, Mr. Tuttle, he says, I believe that what you're telling me is true. I believe that happened to you. I believe you 100%. I'm not saying I believe you think it is. I believe it happened. I've had patients that have died. Most of them went to heaven. They went through different things. Like people talked about tunnels and things. But he said only one patient that he remembers before went to hell, but nobody's ever been to hell and to heaven. And you seem very excited. He says, I just want you to know that what happened to you is real. You died, and this is probably what you died from. I'll take a look at the records from the paramedics and talk about that later. But yeah, so he validated, that, hey, yeah, it's real.
So God gives you a deposit of gifts. You get sent back to earth. The next day you go process with this doctor. How does that turn into ministry? Like what is that path forward? I mean, we could probably talk for hours about what that looked like, but how do those gifts, how does your journey into ministry unfold?
Well, it unfolded by some things at home to start with. God had me do the gifts at home, so I practiced them, just in the home. Nobody else knew about it. I wasn't supposed to. And I had to wait until the angel said I could start talking about it in order to allow people to understand the gifts and things that were given to me. And I had to wait 35 years. Okay.
Sure.
It was a little bit longer than I expected. I was thinking maybe a week, 2.
Sure.
So 35 years later, but yeah, it was difficult, but then it came time to start doing it. Came time to get into ministry. And when the angel came and spoke to me at that point in time, I was freed up to go do things. And that was a difficult time because I was doing things, but behind the scenes, behind the lines were, I just had to stay back there. I couldn't really come out with it. But I had a knowledge that when somebody would say something, sometimes that knowledge would slip out,
Sure.
And I said, yeah, but in the Bible, if you look at it and I go, oh, I never thought of that, And so there are a lot of things like that. So that's how it began.
Sure.
So.
Well, in terms of the gift, I know you move in prophetic and seer gifts, and you see things, and I'm going to assume you also help minister and healing as well.
Yes.
In terms of getting filled with the Spirit and kind of your church upbringing, did you have somewhat of a grid for those gifts early on in life before you started moving in them later?
Well, maybe so, but they didn't talk about them much back then.
Okay. So
not
as popular as it is now.
It wasn't thought of. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we prayed for people and hoped they got healed.
Okay.
Even though we were spirit filled.
Sure.
It's like we were expecting a miracle, but don't worry about it.
Like charismatic with a seatbelt.
Right. Kind of like what it was. So yeah, I had a touch. I mean, I did have probably a touch of the prophetic.
Okay.
But it wasn't something we talked about. It wasn't something that you practiced back then.
Sure.
It just didn't happen.
And in terms of, stepping into full blown ministry, given release to talk about what you experienced and eventually write your book, from that time the angel comes and says it's time to be released. What does that season look like for you?
Well, now I'm traveling all over the place. Once in a while, I make it to my house, which actually is great the way God has it. I mean, the way everything is planned out. I mean, it's wonderful. It's great. It's beautiful. But I'm able to go places now, and I'm able to see people's lives change. Look, there's nothing like watching somebody's life change, when you speak to somebody and they get it, and you talk to them about the different things you were, shown. You talk about hidden intentional sins. You talk about this, you talk about that, and, talk about how God changed your life, and how you used to be and how God will forgive everybody. But then now we have to go deeper into that. We have to get into the prophetic. We need to get into the healings. We need to get into word of knowledge. We need to see people get up and walk. We need to raise the dead, which has happened, and things like that. And people get healed. I mean, it's demons cast out. I mean, demons are real. That's what people just don't understand. But and now you're ready for this. Here's the secret about getting rid of demons. Have no fear. Because they feed off of fear.
Right.
And if you have absolutely no fear, because I have an understanding that I couldn't have had before. And that understanding is they have no power over you on earth if you have the Spirit of God in you. But if you allow that fear to come in, then they have that power over
right.
you. So not to get off track, but just kind of bring that up.
That's a really good point. Because if you read in a wide range of exorcism and deliverance related books, in terms of demonic torment, they feed off of fear, and they'll try to bring an increase of fear because really they feed off that, and that's partly what gives them some of their power. I want to backtrack a little bit, and you and I have had a number of conversations. But in terms of that season when you were kind of behind the scenes and learning to operate in the prophetic, you kind of toyed with your son a little bit, where you would be like, "I know where you are, and I know what you did," and he thought you bugged his car. It's a funny part of your story. Share that with us.
I could see every place he went, everything he did. And so my son tells me about this, and it was just kind of one of those funny things. And I laughed when he was 21 and he's telling me about it. He says, "But Dad, at that point in time, I knew you had something really, really special from God. I knew it was real for sure then."
I feel like on the one hand, I could say we're seeing an uptick in near death experiences. On the other, I could say that God is not unlike you. God's prompting people to share their stories. And so, are people having more of these experiences? I feel like to some degree, yes, but I also feel like some of it is people are sharing stories of what they encountered maybe, several decades back. Um, as we kind of survey the world scene, the times we're in, what's happening from your perspective as a near death experiencer, why do you think God is bringing these experiences to the forefront from a ministry perspective? Because clearly, culturally, there's a massive interest in supernatural things, in the paranormal, and Satan and the world is more than happy to fill up that kind of void and put their stuff in there. What does God want to do with stories like yours, stories like Randy's?
Well, I think what God is doing right now is he's reaching out there and he's allowing these experiences to happen so that people can come back. And the world wants supernatural,
Right.
which really they want the natural. They want what Adam had. They want what Eve had. They want what they had in the garden. That's what they're looking for because that was so supernatural but natural. And so all of those things, as crazy as it sounds, that's what we're coming back to.
Hmm.
People are realizing they've seen all these books for kids, about, you can become a warlock and you can do this and you can do that. People are hungry for supernatural power. What they don't realize is the real supernatural power comes from God. And once you understand that supernatural power coming from God, and God's wanting to release this on the land, he's wanting to release it on the people. Because look, Satan is the great imitator. He's trying to imitate everything that we have. Flying through the air. Hey, look, we can translate, go from
Sure.
one place to the other, things like that. These are real things that really happen. You read about it in the Bible. All these fake things they're doing are trying to take away from what God had established here on earth to begin with. People are starting to have these things. I think there might be an uptick in some of them because they're saving more lives today than they could before.
Sure.
But people are having these experiences and God wants them to talk about it. God wants that to be out there to know that there is a real thing, not just the fake supernatural.
And one of the things we've tended to shy away from, we don't want to talk about hell a whole lot. We don't want to talk about judgment. I always say it's kind of bubble gums and unicorns. We want to talk about grace and heaven, and it's all wonderful. But the reality is, not unlike what you just shared with us in our last episode, there is a real hell. There is a real place of eternal torment. There is a white throne judgment that's coming. Why do we need to stop avoiding talking about hell? Because we don't talk about it enough in the church, in my opinion.
Well, the problem is we need to talk about it. This thing of let's make everything just, beautiful and, wine and roses and it smells great and everything is great. Look, it's not the way life is. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. We need to understand that, look, first of all, do you remember back in the 80s, I guess it was, or 90s, everybody got a trophy for whatever they did.
Sure.
Okay, so
participation trophy.
Participation.
You get a trophy. You get a trophy. Yeah.
That is a setup from the devil. And I'm going to be real blunt. And the reason
Sure.
why it is it never allows anybody, nobody wants to succeed. Nobody needed to excel. Nobody needed to dig in. Oh, we're all going to be the same. See, that's a lie of the devil. The devil makes everybody think, oh, we're all the same. Don't worry. Everybody's saying, yeah, we're all equal, but we're not all the same. We're all different, but we're all equal in God's eyes. But what happens is that if this can be set up, well, why look for God? Don't worry about it. Your sins are forgiven even before you sin. They're going to be forgiven. You don't have to do this. You don't have to. Oh, hell's just something in your imagination.
Right.
Hell is the bad things that you live out in life. That's not true. But that's the reason why that's watered down like that. They're trying to twist people's minds so people aren't afraid of dying. So they're not afraid of going to hell. So they can trick them up so they can get them into hell. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's why it's being done.
Well, and again, it's not unlike the description you gave of Lucifer being beautiful and attractive. You couldn't take your eyes off him, so to speak, in that same way with how people often describe hell. It's going to be a great big party. It's going to be amazing. Do all the awful, horrible things we always wanted to do. And as you saw, it's completely the opposite of that.
Yeah, look, that stupid thing, right? Hey, I'll see you in hell. We'll party in hell together. That's the dumbest thing anybody's ever said. I'm sorry, but that, that just takes me way back because you're not going to do that. You're not going to party. You might have a pity party for each other in hell. That's about it. Because you go see the other person there and you're like, oh man, if I could have just told you about Jesus, I mean, if I had known about Jesus, oh man, I didn't know this. That's the only party you're going to have down there. You're not going to do that. It's horrible. It's the most devastating thing that you could ever imagine. It's devastating. It's worse than anything you'd ever imagine. And it's true. People need to know this, that hell is not a party place. It's a for real place, and it's a horrible place, and you're going to go there unless you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and not just accept him, but live for him. The first step is accepting him. The second step is living for him, living the way you're supposed to live as a Christian. In other words, giving up the old things. You can't just keep wallowing in the same old junk and think, hey, I'm going to walk into heaven like I own the place. It's not like that.
Well, and I think one place people struggle when they hear some of these stories is many of our friends who've shared their heaven encounters and hell encounters. Many of them are given a choice, and people wrestle with that because a lot of people are like, well, whatever happens here on earth, that's your decision point. But there are some things that people have shared that kind of challenge that for us. How have you wrestled with that?
In the respect of, well, if I know that I have to live a certain lifestyle, I know that. I cannot just go back to the way I was. I can't. That's my choice. My choice was you come back to earth and I have a choice of making it right or just keep going what I'm doing, still keep living in hell. And that's a choice that I have. That's a choice that I get to make. And so I had to make that choice. My choice was immediately, I want to give up everything.
Sure.
And that's why I sat on that little avocado green rocker with the little tassel things around it, crying all night long. It was time to give it up, man. You have to. You can't just keep, once you give your life to the Lord, or once you come back from heaven or hell or wherever you come back from, no, there's no way. I can't cross that line. There is a line, it's drawn in sand, so to speak. There's a line in the sand, and you can't cross that line. You can't have one foot in the world and one foot in church or one foot in the Lord. You can't do that. It does not work because you're lukewarm and you're going to be spit out of his mouth and you're not going to get to heaven, period. No other way about it.
Well, Ivan, it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you for sharing a powerful story. To those of you watching, it's not time to be lukewarm. It's not time to keep riding the fences. Ivan has shared with us over these two conversations, hell is a real place. Heaven is a real place. We want to see you in heaven. And so if you haven't gotten right with the Lord, today is the day to get right with him. And just thanks again for watching us. We hope you've been blessed by this conversation. And we'll see you again soon on another episode of Engaging the Supernatural.